this is like live television, I guess, that
Reality show.
yeah, exactly. You see the sausage made. Well, I think I better first start out and again, we have a packed house here, and we're happy that virtual book signing brings live bodies in besides just by the broadcast media of the web. But when you can't make it again, I hope you'll be with us right there, and I'll be looking into your eyes. Let me say hello again to our guest today. Orville Vernon Burton was born in South Carolina, as you can hear, but he had an affinity for Lincoln from an early age and read extensively. Thank you. He married a Yankee girl and began teaching at the University of Illinois back in 1974 in Urbana. Today you're at Clemson University as professor of history and director of the Cyber Institute, and still at the University of Illinois as an emeritus University Distinguished Teacher Scholar and a professor. Vernon was the winner of Chicago Tribune's 2007 Heartland Prize for Nonfiction for The Age of Lincoln, which we had you on here for, and we recommend you going into the archives and rewatching that. That was a wonderful show that we did. His major areas of research are race relations, family, community, and religion, and his work has appeared in more than 100 articles in a variety of journals. Really, we have a few books to show for today. The one that we will be talking about today is The Struggle for Equality, essays on sectional conflict, the Civil War, and the Long Reconstruction. It's edited by Vernon with Gerald Potter of Lawrence University and Jennifer Weber of University of Kansas. And it's the University of Virginia Press, 306 pages, and is $45. And actually is done in honor of our colleague here, James McPherson. It's written by your students over the years, and we'll get into this. It's categorized into 3 sections, and let's talk about that in a moment. Again, the President of the United States, maybe Michael Jordan. When I say the President of the United States, I mean Abraham Lincoln. And Michael Jordan don't need introductions. You don't need one either. You've been on our archives as well. You are now the George Henry Davis 86th Professor of History, Emeritus at Princeton, where you've been for a long time, and a best-selling author, of course. I mean, everyone here has read a dozen of your works, I hope. Battle Cry of Freedom, of course, won the Pulitzer. For Cause and Comrades won the Lincoln Prize, first time. Crossroads of Freedom and Tried by War also won the Lincoln Prize in 2009. So today's book and why these 2 distinguished people are here with us is because of this book, The Struggle for Equality. And it's categorized into 3 sections: sectional conflict, Civil War, and the Long Reconstruction. Vernon, tell us briefly who the essay contributors are, what more or less they're covering. Well, there we are. Tell us a little bit about the background of this book.
Well, Jim's students, and they're sort of generations, and I hate to think of myself this way, but I'm the older generation of earlier students, thought we really wanted to honor Jim, and we had a conference, and all along we wanted to do a festschrift because we are obviously biased, but we think he's America's greatest historian. And there's no doubt, having directed a number of graduate students myself, I would say he became the model for us as both scholars and as people. And as his graduate student, I can say there's not a better PhD advisor. I tried so much to practice the principles that I saw him really do in that way. So this book comes out of a conference we did at Princeton when Jim retired. I still think him as a young professor, playing tennis and riding his bike at Clemson. I bet he's probably still doing both. I don't know. I wouldn't doubt it. And I'm a little worried that people are going to think I'm older than he is sitting here because he looks so young and I'm getting long in the tooth.
Don't worry.
But that was the motivation for it, But what is amazed with the work at the University of Virginia Press and with the help of Dick Hallway and some, I think it shaped into a very meaningful volume that captures the themes that has made Jim's work so important to all of us, and I'd like to think that's made the world a better place. And while we are not Jim McPherson, we are trying to look at, in these sort of three eras, and some of them are broken down almost by the different generations that came to work with Jim, the themes that he has written about in American and world history that I think inspire people today to sort of understand our history, learn from it, and to make a better world. And there's that element there, if you want to get to that, to be either critical or praising.
I have to admit, when I was reading the book, and I knew that both of you would be here, Woody Allen's film Annie Hall came to mind. And when he's in the movie line, if you all remember, and someone in back is talking about Marshall McLuhan, and he brings Marshall McLuhan on and says, "Don't you wish life was like this?" It is. So tell me, did he get you right?
Well, he overstated the case, I would say, by a factor of 10 or so.
I know you would say that, but I think he did get you right.
I'm,
If anything, I was modest toward him.
You know, I kind of have so much to ask you that I almost don't even know where to begin. We're talking, of course, about equality in this book. Tell us about the three sections in here and what the book is telling us. You know, in here, what are we going to see? Whom are we going to see? What are the various people we're going to see in here? The essays of Jim's students.
I should probably let Jim, who knows his students better than I do, but I will
just
say
just
one of
this
the joys of doing this book was getting to know Jim's students from other generations. For instance, Gerald Podair, whose period of time of history will take us all the way to Bard Rustin, has become one of my most treasured friends in the process of getting this book done and working with others to get it done. When I sort of came to Princeton in 1969, the tail end of the Civil Rights Movement, and Jim's earlier work had been so essential there. And so the first section is really sectional conflict. And here, these students were actually after my time, but Phil Katz writes about John Meredith Reed and the discontent of American republicanism. Judith Hunter, who had actually been an undergraduate with Jim, wrote about abolitionism and General James C. Wadsworth, something we're seeing a lot more now about in terms of how the war affected individuals who were involved in it in their attitudes toward race relations, something that Jim had sort of laid out in his very earliest work. And the first essay in the sectional conflicts by Ryan Jordan on the abolitionists and just how radical they were, and he looks very carefully at the Quakers, and that sort of forms our first section. And then, of course, what Jim is so well known about is the Civil War itself. And there are a number of really superb essays. Joe Glathar, who is one of the terrific, in fact, probably outside of Jim, my second favorite military historian, writes about Lee's Army. Jennifer Weber, who people know her work, particularly about Copperheads, is looking at how Union soldiers become more political, which goes back in some ways to the Wadsworth essay by Hunter. Ron White, who was in graduate school at Princeton when I was there, of course, looks at Lincoln's speeches, and particularly focuses on one here, as only Ron can do, and I think at the highest level of morality and what Lincoln is about. I love his writing in general. An essay that I don't necessarily agree with is by Bruce Dane on Abraham Lincoln. But that's one of the things I have always loved about Jim McPherson, and have tried to do the same with my graduate students. They don't have to agree with me. I want them to think for themselves, and I think history is an interpretation, and so this is an interpretation that while I'm not exactly totally accepting of it, it makes me rethink my own ideas, assumption.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to ask this, but I am. Does interpretation involve philosophy? You're historians, but if you're going to interpret, you're coming with something already.
Well, you should ask the master on that
am.
one, I think.
Well, I was partly joking when I said earlier that I was an historian and not a philosopher. I was trying to get Ed's goat, but you know.
Oh,
No,
I'm
you're
sorry.
right. Historians, every historian brings all kinds of cultural assumptions, points of view, perspectives, biases, if you will, preferences and prejudices to his work, and that's clearly going to influence the way in which the historian looks at the past. And the way that the historian chooses to interpret the meaning of that past. Questions of cause and effect and consequence.
Here you are confronted with all your students here, which is a wonderful honor. Has teaching changed? The way one teaches changed over the years you've been doing it? The way you've taught them, has that changed?
I don't think the teaching of graduate students has changed that much over the years that I've been doing it. The emphasis is on research, thinking for yourself, coming up with your own ideas and interpretations, clarity of expressing those interpretations and ideas in your writing. That pretty much stayed the same, I think, despite the technological changes that took place between when I first started teaching at Princeton in 1962 and when I retired in 2004. There had been enormous changes in the kind of externalities of teaching, but I think the fundamental part of it, especially with graduate students, stayed pretty much the same.
This book covers the issue, I'm going to kind of get into some of these for a moment, covers the issues of race and the broader issue of equality in national life, something you both have been interested in throughout your professional and probably personal careers as well. Those who control equality control the direction of American history itself, quote unquote. Please explain that. How does that control history itself? And can equality be legislated? I mean, affirmative action was tried. Talk to me about all of this, if you wouldn't, both of you really.
Go ahead.
Let me address the latter first. We go back to Little Rock, Arkansas, and the statement by President Eisenhower that you cannot legislate people's hearts. Well, that's true, but what I've discovered both as a historian and I teased Jim quite a bit because he wrote about the abolitionists, but he had two graduate students, Peyton McCrary, who was really superb and has a great essay here I want to recommend people to read because it shows the sort of long reconstruction of the modern civil rights movement even today in terms of the Voting Rights Act. And it does make a difference. I have seen that legislation may not change people's hearts directly, but unless you remove those barriers that allow an attempt toward equality, you cannot change people's hearts. But I do think the legislation allows us to remove barriers, and then the actual actions that are there do change people's hearts. I think you can see it, and it changes history, as certainly the Voting Rights Act did. I jokingly have a long overdue book out that's entitled Voting Rights Act and Air Conditioning, that two things changed the South. Air conditioning, the Voting Rights Act. But we have better science education. We have history education, what people call it, so people understand better how how air conditioning works and how the Voting Rights Act worked. And that's a real tragedy. You can't have a democracy, I don't think. And I think Lincoln understood this as well without education and an educated public. And he was talking about a different kind of education. But I think it's central, and we're in a crisis day, and it's probably nowhere better showed, in fact, than in how little we understand how government and democracy works and what it takes to make a democracy work in a nation that's governed by the rule of law. So I forgot your first part of the question. I did want to address that. I hear that a lot. And I started to say, Peyton McCrary and Peyton actually works for the Justice Department now. We were both native Southerners, and teased Jim that we're his two scalawag graduate students, native white Southerners who've done a lot of work in terms of particularly voting rights, but other discriminatory laws and things.
I'm going back to something about your teaching, and thinking about that reminded me a bit of Lerone Bennett and Forced into Glory. And here you are, a Caucasian. Your entire professional career has been on race and equality and the African American. And that's been a focus of it, besides other things, positively. But have you had any backlash from people like Lerone Bennett or that side of the political spectrum?
Well, certainly not from Lerone Bennett personally, but on occasion, especially back in the later 60s and early 70s when I was writing about the abolitionists and about black history more prominently than I have been in more recent years, I occasionally would get some critical feedback from black scholars saying that there were things I didn't understand because I wasn't black myself, and writing about black history was really beyond my, if not knowledge base, at least my heart. I always responded to that by saying that writing about the history of race relations and the position of African Americans in American societies is much white history as it is black history. That from the time the first slaves were brought to Virginia in 1619, their history has been intertwined with that of white Americans. And so I never thought of myself as being a black historian, that is a historian of black history, but as an historian that was dealing with issues that were relevant to all Americans.
Jim was actually a pioneer and helped form the field, as we know it distinctly, of black history. His early works helped make it a legitimate field and even sort of put together the corpus, the sort of, I believe it's probably the first in modern historiography of sort of the what was seen as black history in the edited volume bibliographical work and things that did it. And we actually had this discussion because initially I was going to do my dissertation on Robert Smalls, and I got a lot of feedback, and Jim basically told me the same thing. And he actually did my dissertation on African Americans in Reconstruction in a county in South Carolina, and that was one of the themes of this book, that are part of the students, a number of African American students, that is not students of African American history, but they themselves are black scholars, did their work with Jim, and some of the early came out. One of the tragedies of this book is from that conference and that we had, and before the book was published, 2 of the students died, and both of them were African American scholars. It was really sort of sad, but
And sad for all of us because we
right.
didn't get their work.
But both of them said to me again and again what a difference Jim McPherson made in their lives and giving them the opportunity and training them to be historians. And this was new and rare at the time. You were talking the late 60s and period to work to develop young African American scholars to be historians. It's made a difference in the profession.